So, a question I get a lot is, should I get, when I say I mean like you, pretending to be like a third person. Never mind. Should one interested consumer get the Fender Blues Junior, or shell in some extra dough and bump up to something like the Princeton Reverb, the Deluxe Reverb, or a number of other amplifiers? So today we're going to put a Fender Blues Junior against a Fender Princeton 65 Reissue. We're going to start off with some tone here, then we're going to talk about it a little bit, play them back to back in both similar and different tones so that you can really hear how these amps line up. The results may shock you. That's what I should have titled this video. Guitar player puts one amplifier against another amplifier that costs slightly more, and the results will shock you. That's the, that's what. Enjoy the video. So, Blues Junior versus Princeton Reverb. A lot of people will say the phrase that I just loathe, which is apples and oranges. And I certainly want to respect everyone's, choice to use a stupid phrase. That's neither here nor there. The thing about it is, these are two amplifiers that are very similar in a lot of ways. There are a lot of players who are in the market for one or the other, and the Blues Junior is of course going to be more commonly around, more accessible, a little bit cheaper, but a lot of players are kind of going, yeah, but will I be happy with that? Should I just like wait and invest in the Princeton again, or others? Today we're focusing on the Princeton. And so I think putting them back to back, so like I own them both, and I had never actually put them back to back. I'd always kind of played one in one context and one in another. So I think it's good to hear them back to back for any of you who are looking at this kind of having a hard time deciding between one or the other. The results may shock you. The results about the two amplifiers did actually surprise me. My response to it is that the Princeton is better, but the Blues Junior stands up. And what I would like to say about this is that the Princeton is like Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's a masterpiece, it's beautiful, it's very well done, and while there might be a couple of things that didn't quite live up to the source material, see in this metaphor, the source material would be like the original Princetons from the 60s that were hand-wired and stuff. Well, it had a couple of little things that didn't quite live up to the source material. It is just something that you can absolutely love. The Blues Junior is like the Hobbit trilogy. It's fun, it's well cast, but is flawed and not as good as the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So, you just heard them clean. There was actually a slight edge of grit on the Blues Junior. And it is interesting to approach this comparison because for all their similarities, they are quite different in their setup. Of course, with the Princeton, you get a classic amplifier. There's no master volume. You've got one channel with two different inputs, and you've got reverb and tremolo. It's very, very straightforward. With the Blues Junior, it's kind of like a two-channel amp because you can foot switch the fat switch. You can foot switch the fat switch. Supposedly, though, according to people on the intergoogles and the Facebook groups, that the fat switch is basically like having a number one input and a number two input, which I don't personally know the tech aspect of, but when you talk about it functionally, that makes sense. So if any of you know about this tech-wise, circuit-wise, please feel free to let us know. But is a similar difference to the 1 versus 2 on the Princeton. Just, again, functionally, whether or not it's doing something different is almost irrelevant. If you're a layman, it's almost irrelevant. But again, approaching this comparison, the Blues Junior doesn't have tremolo. The Princeton doesn't have the ability to dial in your preamp like you can using the master volume and volume on the Blues Junior. So while these two are the same wattage amp, and that's actually something that we're going to talk about in a minute, they function differently and they kind of give you a little bit of a different flavor. So what I want to talk about with these amps is they are slightly different than you would expect. These are not going to be necessarily exactly like the ones you get off the shelf at the store. There are a lot of these amps floating around, so it's hopefully still applicable to a lot of people. The Blues Junior is a Blues Junior 3 limited edition tweed with the Jensen C12n. So this is the slightly older model Blues Junior, but the upgraded version with the upgraded speaker. Some of you know that I had swapped speakers in both of these amps. The Blues Junior, I did switch back to the Jensen C12n. For the Princeton, I thought a lot about this, and for a combination of reasons, I switched over to a Jensen P10 instead of the stock C10. Now the P10 is slightly, you could say it's an upgrade or you could say it's a lateral move. It depends on your preference. It's slightly softer top end and slightly warmer than the C10. The P10 is one that comes in quite a few Princetons out there, including some different Tolex ones or the hand-wired one. I no longer have the C10 that came stock in it, so rather than trying to acquire another one of those, I thought, well, the Blues Junior has an upgraded speaker. The Princeton, I have a speaker that comes in stock with other ones, so I did put that speaker in there. I listened to the footage from this one back with some of my other Princeton videos when I had the old stock speaker in there, and the difference is surprisingly subtle between the ceramic and the Alnico. The other thing is that both of these amplifiers have had to have their reverb tanks replaced. They each, the reverb tank, the bed, as we say in Maine. So they're not exactly what you would get stock off the shelves. However, that being said, they both sound like a Princeton and a Blues Junior. Every one of them slightly different. There are a number of models of each that have different speakers or different features. I'll also have a Blues Junior 4, which some of you have seen the review of. That one I chose not to go with because even though it's the next level up, that one has more of a speaker upgrade to the Eminence. So I thought this is probably the more common one that you're going to see floating around as far as the Princeton versus Blues Junior. So that's what you're listening to today. Again, I've heard a lot of different Blues Juniors. I've heard a lot of different Princetons. They pretty much sound like Blues Juniors and Princeton. Some of them might be a little bit smoother, some of them might be a little bit edgier, but they, character-wise, these are great representations. The reason I brought up the wattage too is because the new Fender model is listed at 12 watts and a number of Princeton reverbs are listed at 12 watts, whereas when I got mine, it was listed at 15 watts. So little idiosyncrasies. I mean, it sounds like a Blues Junior and it sounds like a Princeton. So for those of you who are looking at this, the ones that you find might not sound exactly like this, but then you're not going to be in the same setting that I am. You're not going to be playing the same guitars. We all play a little differently. So hopefully this still gives you a good picture of what each amplifier is like. Speaking of which, we are going to jump back in with some tone now, and to get started, to highlight the differences, I thought it would be fun to show two things that the other one doesn't, which I mentioned. The Princeton has tremolo, and the Blues Junior has the ability to crunch up the preamp at lower volumes. So let's take a listen now to something that they each do that the other one doesn't. All right, now at the beginning you heard clean tone with the Stratocaster. Now let's go clean tone back to back with Les Paul and see how it sounds with humbuckers. Now we're going to see how they take pedals. Here's one of the tricky things with, again, doing this comparison, or if you're looking at these amplifiers. If you're looking at the Princeton, it is going to be hard to overdrive in a lot of practical settings. They get pretty loud, surprisingly. They don't get unbearably loud, they don't get unusably loud, but to get it to naturally overdrive, it's still pretty loud, and it's going to be loud for a lot of clubs and a lot of settings when you might need to use it. So for a Princeton, probably one of the situations you're going to be is need to use a pedal board if you want different levels of gain. Blues Junior, obviously you can dial that in to sound crunchy at much more reasonable volumes, but we're going to hit them both on the clean channel with pedals and see how they each take pedals. So for this I'm using jam pedals. I'm using a Lucydreamer overdrive, and I'm using the delay Llama. First we're going to play it clean, then kick on the Lucydreamer, and then add some delay to give it kind of a nice lead tone. So check these out. All right, now lastly, we're going to get it rip-roaring a bit. We're not going to turn it all the way up because all the way up is a little bit impractical, but we are going to get them cranking to, this is probably about the loudest I could possibly see having at any sort of potential average gig. You know, maybe not a massive stage, but if you're playing a massive stage with one of these amps, you'd be mic'd. I can't imagine a massive stage you'd be playing where you're, you know, maybe there are situations out there where that happens, but I can't imagine playing a huge venue where you wouldn't be mic'd with one of these. So this is about as loud as I could possibly see them getting. On the Princeton, it's at about 8. On the Blues Junior, you'll see with the master and the volume kind of dialed up. So pretty serious crunch from this. Now we're going to do this with both a Fender Stratocaster and a Les Paul Deluxe now. So that has the mini humbuckers. It's going to be a slightly more slender sound, but still a hard driving sound. So let's hear how these two amps sound when they're cranked pretty hard. So, like I mentioned, I think the Blues Junior holds its weight, surprisingly. I thought the Princeton was just going to bury it when I decided to do this video, but hearing them back to back, I was actually like, you know, that Blues Junior, it's particularly because it's the Blues Junior 3, and they made a lot of improvements on the Blues Junior 4. I was surprised how well it held its own, and it made me actually like the Blues Junior more. Now, that being said, if I could have the choice between the two of them, I'd still take the Princeton because that's the type of amp that I like. The clean tone is much clearer, much more of that real nice presence sounding natural but without getting too harsh. The Blues Junior does still have some of those little idiosyncrasies, like it, you know, it kind of sounds like it has a blanket over it, but then at the same time it has some harsh frequencies, so you can't really get the treble going too much. That being said, it's still a fun amp, it's still a nice amp, and actually when you talk about natural drive tones, I preferred the Blues Junior, surprisingly. The Princeton, it sounds almost Tweed-esque the way that it starts to really grind and break up. And there's also some kind of fizziness. Now, some of that has to do with the speaker, and that is also going to be true of the stock speaker that most of the Princeton 65 reissues come with, which is the C10. I actually found that with the C10 in general. One of the things I didn't like about it is when you turned the amp up, there was some kind of fizzy artifacts going on that I didn't like. I found that with the P10 as well. So that can be remedied with different speakers. When I had a Weber speaker in there for a while, it didn't seem to have that. The breakup was a lot smoother. So keep in mind that the speaker can make a big difference in either of these amps, but the crystal clear, straightforward playing with the, you know, the beautiful, better reverb in my opinion, and the tremolo on the Princeton. And I like using pedals anyway, so for me the Princeton is what works. I think if you're recording at home or doing gigs, you don't like a pedal board, or you really want to have kind of an edge of breakup tone as your bass tone, that Blues Junior's, like I said, it's surprisingly good. It held up a lot better than I thought. But let us know what you think in the comments. What models do you have? Are you looking at both of these? Do you have some kind of variation? Again, like I mentioned, there are a lot of different Blues Juniors, a lot of different Princeton reverbs, and with the exception of the 68 Custom, they all pretty much sound like a Princeton or a Blues Junior. You know, they all have little differences, but the character is there. So let us know what you think. I'm Jack Fossett. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.